This is episode 345 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, another week and another extension of our indoor mask mandate, universally applied whether you have been vaccinated or not.
And you heard it here first on Tipping Point, New Mexico. At least we prognosticated correctly that was going to happen.
Oh, it was
that was really, not a tough one, was
really
it?
Hard. I had to get my Johnny Carson
Karnak the Magnificent.
Karnak, yes. It was really tough to figure that one out, given that the previous week, one David Scrace had said that we could be doing this for 2 to 3 years. That would have been a remarkable turn of events if our dear leader, Governor Lujan Grisham, had suddenly gone and pulled that out. That would have been spectacular. But it is not spectacular. It is just another month of indoor masking, which, as I say, I can handle. I am fine with. However, doesn't mean it's based on science or anything. And sure as heck, when it comes to my kids, it bothers the hell out of me, and really seems to be just, it's never ending. It's so we're going to continue to move forward, but November the 12th is the deadline for this latest edition of the mask mandate, and I'm sure we'll look forward to future extensions beyond that, because until the legislature holds her accountable, the governor has complete control over that kind of policy. Now, we talked about last week how New Mexico is one of just a handful of states with a indoor mask mandate, and I went and found a map. This one is posted at heirsoфenchantment.com. The map is from Multi-State, which is kind of a information analytics firm. They did the deal of putting together an actual map of all the states that have such mandates in place. New Mexico is joined by Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, and Louisiana. That is it. District of Columbia does as well, has a universal indoor mask mandate. California, as well as New York and Connecticut, have a mask mandate that does not include vaccinated individuals. Now, if you believe in medical privacy and you don't want to share with the barista at Starbucks your vaccination status, you can still obviously wear a mask. But considering that 75+% of New Mexicans are mandated or vaccinated, it seems like in California, New York, and Connecticut, it's obviously a much less onerous situation. And then in Nevada, only the high-risk counties, which I would believe would be limited to Las Vegas.
And Reno, probably.
Maybe Reno, yeah.
There's no other people in Las Vegas. With all due respect to those people out there in the hinterlands of Nevada.
So much of Nevada, 95% or so, is federally owned. There's not much room for anything else. But if you live in one of those areas outside of the metro Las Vegas and maybe Reno areas, I'm sure you've probably been a little less affected by a wide variety of mandates and other rules than you have in the big city. Of course, that's where so much of Nevada's economic sustenance comes from. And I guess you can, now at the slot machines, I haven't been to Vegas since this whole thing started, but remember, it used to be that people would bring drinks to the slot machines. Now, people probably even who would normally not take those beverages are just doing them on the assumption that they can not put a mask on while they're sitting at a slot machine. So probably driven some people to drink more, potentially alcohol, but even water. Anyway, Wally, anything to weigh in on the governor extending our mask mandate? Not a surprise.
No, not a surprise. And, there are things that are clearly science with regard to COVID that are clearly justified. And there are an increasing number that are clearly political and not necessarily effective health policy. The mask never was much thought that was going to do much of anything, but boy, it sure became very symbolic, and it's not surprising that that's a symbol that we like. I remember, Paul, there used to be, I can't remember which group it was. It might have been hospice, but don't want to offend any groups, but they would use these little poppies as a symbol that you would give into that group. And so, the mask has become a symbol that COVID means a lot to you, and you're doing your part, even if the actual act of wearing the mask is of a very questionable benefit.
Now, related to this, on the front page of the Albuquerque Journal today, it notes that New Mexico has enacted a crisis standard for rationing care in hospitals. And coming up with adequate data to fully explain the situation is quite a challenge. However, the gist of it is that there has been an uptick in COVID cases. However, we're nowhere near where we were back in January, for example, of 2021, or parts of last year where we had the big surge in October, November, and December as well. So this is definitely not just COVID. However, there are some number of people who probably put off care. We're way past the 15 days to flatten the curve. Maybe they thought, 3 months, 6 months, whatever problem that they could put on hold, they did. And apparently now, according to Dr. Scrace, who had another press conference on Monday, he said that is an increasing issue. People coming in with stuff that they put on hold, and now the bleep is hitting the fan, so to speak, and they are having serious health issues, and that's causing strain on the system. Of course, you have medical providers of all stripes, nurses, etc., who have been stressed over the last year and a half and more. And then you have people who have been not willing to get the vaccine, who are stepping away from the health system. And I know personally that there are several people who've done that. We've saw Southwest pilots. Delta Airlines recently said that they're not going along with the vaccine mandate. So all of these factors have really created a witch's brew that just in time for Halloween, where, again, we're rationing care in our healthcare system. It's not a good thing.
Yes, and healthcare during the era of COVID was a very difficult industry to be a part of right now. And the whole issue is that healthcare is not immune from the labor shortages that are frankly impacting every industry out there.
True.
The only I don't know if there's an industry a major employer that hasn't been hit in some way, shape, or form. If so, I certainly haven't heard it. Everything from distribution, warehousing, healthcare, teachers, government. They're having a hard time getting prison guards in places, police officers. There's not one that isn't there. So is this a surprise? Not necessarily. And then you brought up an interesting point, is the mandates coming out of Washington that many states have, where vaccinate or be fired. That is coming to a head in lots of places. And it'll be very interesting to see. It appears like in many industries, they're flinching and backing away from that, although not all. There's everything from teachers to major college football coaches to pro athletes have been let go because of their refusal to get a vaccine. And then the final point is COVID is, it's here, it's still here, it's always been here. There earlier this year, Paul, in the late spring, early summer, it seemed like happy days were here again. The vaccine was going to work. COVID was going to go away. We weren't going to have to worry about this. And now we're seeing in countries around the world, and that's been happening for a while, particularly in places like Israel, but now it's coming home to roost in the United States that being double vaccinated doesn't necessarily prevent you from getting the disease. And so we're seeing a lot of breakthrough cases. The thing that I find interesting is, they held out the vaccine as the gold standard of prevention of transmission. Now, my thought is, and again, I will go on record as saying that this is my scientific hypothesis that the gold standard of prevention of spread of COVID is having people who have had COVID and then recovered from it.
Yeah.
And so, we'll have to see how all that plays out. But as we see these statistics swirl around, there's a lot of lag in things. And, places like San Juan County that has extremely high levels of vaccination is still having high levels of COVID.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the immunity that you develop when you get the virus itself. And various studies have shown that that is indeed the gold standard. That is the not necessarily the best way because of the dangers of COVID itself, but that is the best form of immunity available. Studies have shown that. And a couple quick notes, of course, Colin Powell passed away recently. He was 84 years old. He was fighting cancer. He was fully vaccinated. So when he died of COVID or had COVID, he had so many issues, and this is one of the classic discussion points of the entire virus is it dying of COVID, dying with COVID, and maybe COVID just pushed him over the edge. Of course, then there's people who say, well, the vaccines aren't effective because they didn't prevent somebody who was immunocompromised. There's a lot of different factors involving that. I'm not going to get into all of them, but certainly there is a strong age distribution of COVID-19. If you are among the elderly, you are very susceptible to it. If you are immunocompromised, you're doubly susceptible. And the vaccine, while it's helpful for, I think, a lot of middle-aged adults, when you're 84 years old and sick, that is a very difficult situation. Now, on the flip side, of course, a lot of nurses, we have UNMH in New Mexico, which is under the state. So state mandate is to get vaccinated.
And that is our
governor.
level 1 trauma center. So if you are in need of intensive trauma care, that's where you go.
So that is a clear problem, I think, with a vaccine mandate. And you've got a conflict there. And I know personally of nurses who have left the profession because of the vaccine mandate. And that number is not going to be reported, unfortunately, in the news in a clear and concise way. The only way they're out there, and even the Southwest Airlines situation, while most people assume that this is related to the vaccine mandate, both the airline itself and the union representing the airline completely denied that the vaccine mandate had anything to do with it. So it's hard to say. It's hard to get a firm grasp on a lot of these things. And one quick addition to the conversation is that there's going to be a piece of legislation in Albuquerque City Council to mandate vaccines for police and firefighters. Again, this is a bill. I don't know if Mayor Keller can do this if he wanted to by himself. It would certainly cause waves, especially in an election year. But this is our old buddy, Mr. Authoritarian, Isaac Benton. Yeah. He has proven himself to be wrong on every single significant issue, which even Pat Davis, who I think we disagree with 98% of the time, is right more often than Isaac Benton. But this is just a piece of legislation, and it is something that I suspect will not go very far. Although, after Mayor Keller is safely reelected, if that is indeed what happens, you could see further pushes. But to be honest, the mayor has not been nearly as hell-bent on COVID lockdowns, mandates, and all the like as the governor.
He does not have an inherent love for the battling of it and thinking that every little tweak and action that is done by his administration is having this profound impact. Far from it, at least relative to what's happening at the state level.
Yeah. Now, in terms of non-COVID issues, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, their latest testing data came out. I haven't checked what the data are for each individual state. Normally that lags a little bit behind kind of the top line broad U.S. data. But this is the gold standard, especially at a time when New Mexico's statewide testing, first and foremost, they change it so often. The park test was under Martinez, but even the park test was new to Martinez, so you only have a handful of years of data there. Then you have Lujan Grisham coming in, changing it, and immediately in 2020 and 2021, there's no data available or minimal data. It hasn't been released. There's some data available for 2020 because there was testing going on, so about 10% of the results in the Albuquerque Journal in their editorial pages said, this should be released. I tend to agree with them, but what you're going to find out from a tiny fragment of that data is unclear. The NAEP test is the gold standard. This is given on a national basis to a statistically representative sample of 9-year-olds and 13-year-olds. And the basic findings are nationwide that things are not going well. And this is pre-pandemic, especially for African-American and Hispanic students. The latter, Hispanics, of course, being a major factor in New Mexico. And it basically says that since 2012, scores for 13-year-old students declined in reading by 3 points, in math by 5 points, while scores for 9-year-olds remain unchanged. And it just overwhelmingly shows that America's educational system at large, while there's some high points and some low points, is not getting the job done, not really moving the needle on educational results in this country. And if the United States is not getting the job done and Hispanics are lagging the national average in terms of growth, New Mexico is going to be further falling behind, unfortunately.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Paul, what you were saying is that the 13-year-olds actually were faring worse than the 9-year-olds,
Right.
which is interesting. So, again, I am not again, a question from a statistics point of view is you would think that the 9-year-olds would be more heavily influenced by the level of academic achievement they had coming into school. The 13-year-olds, on the other hand, that's like they're going down while they're in the system. It's even getting worse. So that is, I don't think if from a policy point of view, that's particularly good news right there. Because if it were the other way, you would almost argue that, well, maybe some of that lower number could be preparedness coming out of the family going into the school system. But it's tough to make that call with this set of data.
Yeah, and like I said, we'll dig into this. This is a news report based on the initial data. Perhaps it could be simply a timing thing, that there's some shifts in our society and our culture that happened between the ages of 13 and 9 years old. It's hard to exactly say, but
yeah, maybe you get your cell phone and you spend all of your time on the cell phone. I don't know.
I think
I might be onto something.
I think you may have a more than a nugget of truth there, but I won't make any specific assumptions. One of the other notes is that reading scores among the lowest performing students, those in the 10th percentile, declines among 9 and 13-year-olds compared to 2012. So there is a decline. There is a gap widening between the better off, highly performing students and the lower performing students, which again does not bode well when the full results are released for New Mexico and for other, for all the states, because we know that New Mexico is at the bottom end.
Well, and Paul, do you think that they would be withholding the little data that they have if the news was great? What are the odds of that? You know what I mean? It's like you just have to think that.
Well, This isn't the state. Yeah, well,
Yeah,
okay. You're talking about
yeah,
the state test.
right.
Yeah, I would like to think that they are not so hyper political that uh, they would withhold that data based on some kind of anomaly in the performance of the students.
Which
But
is a lot like a 12-year-old withholding his. And back in the day, we were in the paper report card
right,
era. So I don't know where my report cards are. They didn't give them to me, you know.
yeah. Well, we'll see. Unfortunately, like I said, based on the state data, we're going to have kind of a blind spot here for a few years, and hopefully, this year, this school year. But the testing's not put forth until the spring, which is why we don't have data in 2020. So we're going to be pretty limited at the state level. I think this NAEP test situation right before the pandemic, we won't know for another 2 years. And then, of course, there's a lag to release that data. So we're kind of flying blind in terms of how the pandemic has truly impacted our kids. I can't imagine it done anything good. And just as an aside, we see at APS, we'd commented on it a while back when uh, there was a letter sent out by Scott Elder, the superintendent, about fighting in the schools. And then I think it was Channel 4 did the expose or an in-depth story about fighting in the schools. I think fighting is the tip of the iceberg with kids wearing masks. It depersonalizes you. It makes learning to read and communicate more difficult, let alone the time that was spent out of the classroom. I try not to think about it too much as the parents of three small children, aside from the fact that we were able to take our kids out and homeschool them for a solid year during the pandemic. And now we've switched beyond kind of the APS system, as have many parents. But I really feel for those kids who haven't been able to really get much out of the education system for the last couple years.
Yeah, and then Paul, as I think about this, is I think New Mexico, the phrase that's used, we need a moonshot, on it. But if anything deserves the hyperbole of a moonshot, it's improving education in New Mexico. And I would say that without COVID, it was justified. And so we know, I mean, it's one of those, did COVID make things better? How could it have? And so, but to your point is, are we going to wait 3 more years, 5 more years to get data that said, boy, that COVID really did hurt us,
Right.
and you're going to have poorly performing 5th graders would be poorly performing 10th graders getting ready to drop out of high school as opposed to go on and finish high school. So data is good and data is wonderful. But by the same token, when you don't have it, absent, something, and here's a crazy thought, Paul. Why couldn't the state of New Mexico, why couldn't APS do some kind of baseline testing of a small sample of students to get a feel for where they really did stand? Is that so, is that such a crazy thing? Or is all this talk about testing just so much political window dressing, and we're fine doing what we're doing. Thank you very much. Don't comment anymore, and we'll get back to you. The experts will get back to you in here 3 or 5 years.
Well, you do realize we are talking about massive, slow-moving, glacial bureaucracies that like their lack of accountability. But I know I'm being facetious there.
Yeah, but also those glacial organizations and glacial animals over time, as conditions change, tend to go extinct too. And we're seeing some level of that, as you alluded to,
Right.
with people seeking out other alternatives.
That is very true. I think the thing that really ticks me off the most about what's going on from a messaging and political situation. Of course, the governor has kicked off her education campaign. And if you followed her Twitter account, you will see regular statements a couple times a week talking about how much she has done for the education system of our children in New Mexico, and how, expanding early childhood and expanding teacher pay and doing this and doing that. And it just, it really makes me crazy, because Yes, I can't blame the governor for everything that has happened in the last year and a half, but a lot of states and also most European countries kept kids in the classroom throughout the year. Doesn't mean it was perfect, doesn't mean there weren't challenges, but it is really disturbing to hear or see the governor making these points. And I just hope people look at that with a jaundiced and very skeptical eye.
Yes, at some point, we've had this discussion a lot, is the difference between monitoring the inputs, how much money is being put into the system, and monitoring the outputs, how good of an education the students in the system are getting. And, without more focus on the outputs, this new education campaign might as well be learn to read more gooder, as far as I'm concerned. It's one of those things, it's like, really? That's what we're saying? We don't have the data. We don't have the focus on improvement. Every now and then we make broad statements, but it doesn't seem like it's followed up with policy or accountability or even an emphasis. Paul, I was not a big, this may come as a shock to you, but I was not a big fan of the weekly COVID update. If I thought real things were happening, I would actually watch a weekly education update done by the governor or any of her cabinet members talking about where we are, what we know, what we're doing, all of that. I mean, I think that, that's actually something as opposed to stopping the transmission of a virus, which is always a iffy proposition. Something can be done about this, and how do we know it? It's been done in other places, and it's being done in other places. Yeah. Maybe we could do it here.
Yeah, well, it would be nice to see something innovative happen, and I'm not holding my breath. And, again, while masking and vaccine mandates and COVID and a lot of issues are going to be at play in the next year when the governor's running for re-election, the handling of the education system, and I can't emphasize enough how critical, how this is. I wish it wasn't this way. I wish the state, not just New Mexico, but the U.S. states had a heck of a lot less of a role in our education system. If we had a private sector, kind of a customer service oriented model of education, then all the nervous Nellies out there could mask their kids up, double mask them up. They could social distance. They could do virtual school forever. And the rest of us can send our kids to in-classroom learning like we believe they should be. But we have this one-size-fits-all monopoly. There's some options. There's charter schools. In fact, there's total virtual learning charter schools out there. But it's the lack of options for parents like me that is what really upsets me and gets my goat about the way our governor runs things. But generally, the way we have to deal with one-size-fits-all public policy in a critical area of New Mexico for our children, it's frustrating. All right. Well, speaking of one-size-fits-all policy, you like that transition there,
yes,
Wally?
Good. That has to apply to something else, Paul.
It's all we talk about. There's the New Mexico State Fair and governor's vaccination mandates. We got the numbers. This is news that was broken, by the way, here at the Rio Grande Foundation. We're the ones that did the records request to find out exactly how many folks have attended the fair in recent years and what the governor's vaccine mandate did for attendance in 2021. So went back a few years, 2018, slightly over 500,000 people, 504,000 in 2018. That number dropped in 2019 to 472,415. So, within the band of acceptability, if you will. Then in 2020, all hell broke loose, and we didn't have a state fair, unfortunately.
Zero.
So the number was zero. Yeah, I would like to think that we could have we could have had a state fair, but I'm going to just leave that there. 2021 is, of course, the real rubber hitting the road time period. 275,467 is the number in 2021, which is a drop of 41%. Now, if you look at this line on a chart, you say, wow, that's decent recovery from a complete zero. Okay, that's fair. But you also look at it and say, well, life has gotten back to normal in many respects. Certainly a largely outdoor fair where close animal contact is right up there with close human contact in terms of, what you're doing. Wear a mask indoors, okay, fine. But the vaccine mandate, one size fits all, especially for the young people showing off their animals at the livestock fair, I think really played a role. That and people just not wanting to be a part of a mandatory vaccine environment. So people stayed away in droves. And I just look for the Balloon Fiesta data because I want to see what their numbers look like relative to past years as opposed to the state fair. I suspect the state fair is going to be on par with or in excess of recent years, whereas obviously...
and the Balloon Fiesta will be on for, but the state fair not.
Wrong, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you, Paula. Just, I know the number of balloonists was very high, comparable with other years, and we had good weather, and I have a feeling that you're right, that it's going to be very close. And then beyond the, what shall we say... Beyond the mandate issues and all of that, we have the issue of anytime you have to check for something else to get into a venue that takes a while to get into a venue to begin with, it's probably going to drive some people away. So, I think that was there a great deal of confidence that you could get into the state fair without being in a long line? Probably not going into it.
Now, something that this raises in terms of a question, I really only started to think about this during this very podcast.
But Paul, you're a think tank, so that's allowable, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm always thinking about this stuff. Sometimes I can't sleep at night because I'm thinking about this kind of thing. But the Lobo basketball team. Now, we went to a football game this past weekend, which was embarrassing, quite honestly. I felt bad for the student athletes out there. The Lobos offense had a record for the lowest number of yards gained in a Mountain West game. I think it was like 79 yards. It was really just not good, not a good performance. But it's an outdoor stadium, so you know where I'm going with this.
Right.
Which is
you don't have to wear a mask if you're a football player, right?
No mask on the football players, although I think our high school athletes, we'll see how that works out. But what I'm looking towards is, of course, this mask mandate has been extended into November, which means basketball season. And there's multiple aspects of this, I think. One is fans will be required to wear masks into the pit. Now, enforcement of that will be very interesting, and you might sell a few extra beers there at the pit, right? Or snacks.
Once you have a drink in your hand, right here we go. I don't need a mask.
Or maybe you remember those hats, the ball caps with the two, beer things. That might be a new returning trend, if you will. Anyway, that just will be an interesting thing. But this whole idea of the vaccine mandate. UNM is a state institution. This is an indoor facility.
Oh.
I think she would be committing further political suicide, but you think there's any chance the governor trots out a vaccine mandate to attend Lobo basketball games? That would be or Aggie basketball games.
Yeah,
I don't want to
just the Aggies. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Boy, are my feelings hurt. So the answer is, there's a chance of that, Paul. Yeah. You'd have to think that there is, because you'd have to go through some mental and policy gymnastics, which I don't know if that's in the cards or not. Very interesting question.
Yeah, it's just something that I kind of was really thinking about here as we had this podcast. I mean, the state fair numbers. I mean, the state fair is a lot more outdoors as a percentage of your overall activities, and you're certainly in less contact directly with people. There are very few places in New Mexico. We're known for our wide open spaces,
Right.
and it's a relatively easy place to socially distance, having grown up in the East and ridden the metro trains around Washington D.C. You don't get much physically closer in proximity to people on a regular basis than if you go to Lobo games, especially sitting in those bleachers, because bleachers give you the benefit slash the problem of
You're
really close
yeah.
proximity. Yeah.
Yeah, the chairbacks separate you by a little bit just by their very design. Those benches have never been. Speaking as a person that I'll call it wide shoulders. I've always felt a little bit cramped in there.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, it'll be. And we are not recommending this. We are not saying we should
advocating
do
it.
this. It's just the governor. She is tiny, so she does probably have a leg up on the gymnastics that we do. I don't know about mental gymnastics,
Right.
but certainly she could do physical gymnastics easier than yours truly or you, Wally. But anyway, we'll just leave that there and hope for the best. Now, Wally, we could change the name sometimes, I think, of our podcast, either to COVID Talk or to utility talk, because there's always something going on with the New Mexico utilities. And well, I like electricity. You like electricity. Our lives depend in many ways on electricity. Now we are seeing meetings before the Public Regulation Commission, not about the San Juan generating station. We are talking Four Corners
Right.
generating station. Now I know you're very involved in San Juan, but Santa Fe, New Mexican, and they really, I have to admit, like Albuquerque Journal, I read them on a regular basis, and they do a good job. But when it comes to some of these issues, Santa Fe, New Mexican is really ahead of the curve. And their reporter, I'll give him credit, Rick Ruggles, writes, PNM is facing criticism over a plan to pull out of Four Corners. Now, that might lead you to believe that some conservative or utility advocates are saying, we want PNM to stay put in Four Corners and continue to generate coal-fired electricity. That is really not what is happening here. We have two different environmental groups, without naming them in this article. One wants to eliminate any ability for PNM to bond out against money that they've spent to retrofit and extend the life of Four Corners. Because, of course, coal was bad from the beginning, so we should never have allowed them to spend that money. And then we have the debate going on as to whether PNM's share in Four Corners should be picked up by, and it's a 13% stake, but if they could sell that or give that, essentially, give that with more money paid to the Navajo Transitional Energy Company, which, of course, the Navajo have a strong interest in tax revenue, jobs, and all the benefits that go along with having that plant there and continuing to serve. So you are pretty knowledgeable about the utility situation. What do you think's going on here?
Well, you talked about the environmental groups, and they do treat coal-fired generation after the fact as if it were the original sin of electricity generation, that it was never justified to use coal ever, and that clearly is not the case. And I believe we'll get to it a little bit later. Coal has been used for electricity generation around the world, and Paul, here's a newsflash: it will be for decades and potentially centuries to come. And is this stake? Should PNM exit only in a way that couldn't be picked up by somebody else? I don't think that. I think that's a bridge too far. That's trying to leverage your environmental advocacy above what's proper and probably what's legal. The other issue is and not just with San Juan, not just with Four Corners, but with coal everywhere. Could you add equipment? Could you add carbon capture and make coal basically much more environmentally friendly? And the answer is yeah. There's projects that have been done to do that. There are a lot of others that are on the drawing board and then various stages of planning and implementation. And this little organization called the Congress of the United States actually has huge incentives to do that. So it's not like this is this wild idea coming out of the four corners of New Mexico that is unheard of nationwide, worldwide. There are actually tax credits to incentivize such a thing. So these are all very interesting, very good questions. But as we go forward, it seems like the vision, at least in the short term, of the Energy Transition Act being able to provide a movement from emission generation, fossil fuel generation, without dramatic costs increases, price increases, and without dramatically damaging reliability is looking to be like it's less and less possible, much less probable. So that's the big picture of it. So yeah, I think that Four Corners, and even if PNM doesn't own it, these plants could benefit PNM directly by providing stability in the regional grid at a time when they may need that in spades going forward as things are changing very quickly. And oh yeah, PNM can't get the parts in to do their new renewable project.
Right.
So
Yeah, it is a pretty complicated situation. Obviously, understanding all of these powers that are at play and their political incentives. We have the Public Regulation Commission, which, as of right now, is still an elected body, but they're very progressive. Then you have the Attorney General writing opinions. You have the environmental groups who really have the time, the expertise, and inclination to make their case. It's not the case of the ratepayers. It's really the ratepayers who have no direct seat at the table. I mean, the article talks about how the environmentalists are upset that PNM is trying to float $300 million worth of 20 to 25-year bonds to be paid off by the customers for the Four Corners station, and using the Energy Transition Act, which has a securitization proposal in it, or a securitization item in it. And it's just a very messy situation. And unfortunately, ratepayers, seems like we either lose through higher rates or we lose through unreliable electricity. There's no winning. It seems like the best case scenario is that the Navajo Intech, that they take over, keep the plant open, and that way, when the renewables don't perform, that we will have some backup power that they can buy on the open market at PNM. Same basic scenario at play for San Juan Generating Station. So
yeah, Paul, and in technology, we always, when I was doing some development, we always used to say fast, good, and cheap, pick any two. Well, in electricity, it's reliable, low cost, low emissions. And it's been marketed that we can have reliability, low cost, and low emissions even during the transition. And I've been dubious of that from the start. There's a lot of, and this is back to modeling. There's a lot of modeling that shows that might happen. There's not a lot of real world experience and implementation. And places like California, what are they doing? They're making it easier to add natural gas generation because they know that turning the lights off is not a good political decision, no matter where you are, even a place that like California.
And the last point actually is very directly related to this. The rumors of Cole's death are greatly exaggerated, as you point out. But it's a global issue right now. Coal markets tend to be pretty localized. There's some international shipping of coal, but I mean, in New Mexico, I know San Juan Generating Station is located right near the coal seam.
Yeah, a so-called mine mouth coal plant.
Yeah.
It's right next door. They built the plant because the coal was there.
And I don't know if Four Corners is in the same general
It's
boat.
close. It's not as close. So,
But so the price of coal since the beginning of the year, January 1st, 2021, has risen by 318%. Europe is increasingly using coal. They're abandoning their radical green plans because their citizens are demanding that they keep the lights on. Asia, which China and India are notoriously already expanding their coal-fired production over there, they're even more involved in increasing the coal usage. So what's my point here? Well, price is driven by demand. So that means that this 318% increase is being driven by a lot of people out on the market buying and using coal because they want to keep the lights on wherever they are. And that, yes, coal is a relatively dirtier fuel source. There are options, including but not limited to nuclear. I mean, natural gas as well, but there's all kinds of supply chain issues. And the point is that we in New Mexico, we in the United States are not going to solve this global warming situation on our own when other countries are embracing coal yet again and producing massive quantities of energy with that coal. It's pushing on a string. There's no way to get it done.
Right. Yeah, without a doubt. And that is one of the arguments for continuing to have coal in the United States and putting carbon capture technology on it, is it shows a way that maybe that's something that China and India could eventually do as well,
Sure.
As opposed to just go it alone. So yeah, Paul, these are very interesting issues. The other thing I want to say about coal is there are markets for coal, but a lot of coal is tied up in long-term contracts with a mine and a power plant being there. And so not as much of the coal as you would think is on the open market. A lot of it is even in places like Asia, I suspect, are tied up in contracts. But the point is that the coal that is on the market, they want more. Those existing contracts aren't enough to meet demand.
Exactly.
And they're trying to get coal anywhere they can, and it's definitely driving up the price. Higher natural gas, higher oil, higher coal. Will nukes remain to be seen?
Well, I've got news on the nuke front.
Okay, here we go.
So the UK has just confirmed a contract for 16 modular nuclear reactors nationwide. England is definitely, when you talk about Western Europe, they always lean a little more towards pro-market. And I think this is a good opportunity for them to be a model. Hopefully other countries step up to the plate. I mean, France has always been big into nuclear energy, and you don't hear a peep out of them for problems. If you manage those plants competently, you actually
which France has done,
right,
without
exactly.
by any objective standard.
So there are ways to do things that environmentalists want to do, but it requires some innovation and compromise. You can't just say, "Oh, we're going to abandon all traditional sources of energy." And you mentioned the three power fuel options. Oil is definitely a global market. It's traded on the world stage, and there's pretty much one price. You get some variations, West Texas Intermediate versus Brent. Then natural gas, there's some
It's a
constraints.
regional market primarily, although LNG is starting to make it more of a national market.
It's a heck of a lot more expensive over in Europe and Asia than it is here. And then coal is coal's one that I have to bone up on, because coal was left for dead. It was really something that people thought wasn't going to be used anymore. So with that, we will leave it there this week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. You can find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com. Subscribe at Stitcher or Apple Podcasts and on our YouTube channel. You can also tell Google Home to play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.